Right at the heart of early Christianity, there's this fascinating puzzle. This new movement grew directly out of a fiercely monotheistic Jewish tradition. And the rule was simple. You worship one God, period. And yet, when you look at some of the earliest Christian texts we have, you see Jesus receiving divine worship. So how on earth did a faith so committed to one God start worshiping a second figure, without seeing it as a complete and total contradiction? That's the mystery we're going to dig into today.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to really lay out the core conflict here. Then, we'll dive into two really crucial clues from these ancient texts. One is a consistent pattern of angels refusing worship, and the other is the stunning exception made for Jesus. We'll see how these clues actually help draw what you could call a divine line. And finally, we'll see why the act of worship itself was the ultimate test of what these early communities truly believed.
Okay, so to really feel the weight of this puzzle, you have to understand the number one, absolutely non-negotiable rule of the religious world that Christianity was born into.
For Jewish monotheism, this wasn't just some abstract philosophical idea. No, it was a bright, uncrossable line in the sand. The ultimate litmus test separating God from literally everything else, humans, angels, any created being, was worship. You worship the Creator, not the creation. End of story.
And this brings us right to the heart of the paradox. I mean, how could a group that saw itself as fulfilling this tradition, not throwing it away, justify offering divine worship to Jesus? Were they just, breaking their own most sacred rule? Or did they understand who Jesus was in a way that completely reframed the whole thing? To start finding an answer, our first clue comes from this surprisingly consistent pattern. You find it all over early Jewish and Christian apocalyptic literature, the genre filled with these wild visions of heaven, angels, and divine encounters. So I want you to picture this. A human visionary gets transported into the heavens. They're standing in front of this glorious, radiant angel, and they are so completely overwhelmed that just fall down to worship. What happens next, in text after text, is the crucial clue.
So let's look at the book of Revelation. The angel's response is immediate. It stops the visionary, John, dead in his tracks. And the reason is key. The angel basically says, hey, I'm not your superior, I'm a fellow servant. And then all worship gets pointed right back to its only proper target, God.
And this isn't just a one-off thing. In a totally different text, the Ascension of Isaiah, the exact same scene plays out. The prophet Isaiah tries to worship his angelic guide and gets shut down immediately. And there's that phrase again. The angel insists, I am not your Lord, but your fellow servant.
Let's do a third example, just to really drive the point home. This is from the Apocalypse of Zephaniah. The visionary sees this magnificent angel and actually mistakes him for God Almighty. But the angel instantly corrects him, making it crystal clear that he's a creature, however glorious, and flatly rejects the worship.
So a very clear, very intentional pattern starts to emerge here. This isn't just a random story beat. It's like a theological firewall. The authors are using this scene to police the absolute boundary between the creature and the creator. The message couldn't be any clearer. No created being, no matter how magnificent, gets worshipped. That is for God and God alone.
All right, so the rule is firmly established. Angels refuse worship. But, and this is where it gets really interesting, our second clue is a stunning and very deliberate exception to that exact rule.
Here is the paradox in its sharpest possible form. In the book of Revelation, the very same book that twice has an angel shout, "Do not worship me," we are shown this vision of the heavenly throne room. And in that vision, Jesus, who is symbolized as a lamb, is worshipped.
And I want you to notice the deliberate parallel here. The language, the actions, they're almost identical. In chapter 4 of Revelation, everyone in the throne room falls down and worships God. Then, in the very next chapter, they do the exact same thing for the Lamb. The structure of the hymns, the posture of worship, it's all mirrored. This is so clearly intentional.
And then you get to the climax of the whole scene. The worship expands to the entire cosmos. And just look at who receives it. The praise is directed jointly to him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. They aren't worshipped one after the other. They are included together in one single, universal act of praise.
So we have two pieces of evidence that seem to be in direct conflict. A strict ban on worshiping angels, right next to a clear picture of worshiping Christ. So how do these two clues actually work together to build a coherent argument?
Well, the author isn't being forgetful.
This is a brilliant, deliberate contrast that's designed to make a huge theological point. By showing angels rejecting worship and then immediately turning around and showing Jesus receiving it, the author is drawing a bold line in the sand, a line that separates Jesus from every other created being.
You know, Revelation's own opening verse even gives us the blueprint for this. The revelation flows from God, through Jesus, is delivered by an angel, and then received by John. So right there, when it comes to who gives the revelation versus who just delivers it, Jesus is put on God's side as the source. The angel is on the human side as the messenger.
This table just summarizes the argument perfectly. On one side of the line, what we're calling the creature side, you've got angels and prophets. They are fellow servants, messengers, and critically, they refuse worship. On the other side, the divine side, you've got God and the Lamb, Jesus. They are the source and the agent, and they receive worship.
The conclusion becomes pretty much inescapable, doesn't it? Through this incredibly careful literary setup, the author makes a radical claim. Angels are fellow servants on the same side of the line as us. Jesus, however, is not. He is placed firmly on the divine side of that great divide, uniquely sharing in the worship that belongs to God alone.
Okay, so this all builds to our final point. We need to understand why this laser focus on worship is the absolute key to unlocking what these early Christians really believed about Jesus.
The scholar Richard Bauckham, whose work really informs this whole explainer, he puts it perfectly. He says if the practical test of monotheism is who you worship, then the fact that early Christians included Jesus in their worship is the most critical piece of data we have about their Christology. It's not some fringe detail, it's the central test.
I mean, you have to remember, everything in their religious universe revolved around the number one. There is one God, and all worship belongs to Him. So to include a second figure in that exclusive act of worship wasn't just some small theological shift, it was the most radical claim they could possibly make.
So, let's pull all this together. What have we seen? We've seen that early Christians had this non-negotiable commitment to worshiping only one God. They used a well-known literary device, the angel who refuses worship, to draw that hard line between the Creator and all of creation. And then, knowing exactly what they were doing, they showed Jesus receiving the very worship they denied to angels. By doing this, they placed him squarely on God's side of that line. This reveals an incredibly high Christology, right at the foundation of their earliest visionary writings.
And so this leaves us with one final really powerful question to think about. If worship was the absolute, uncrossable line separating all creation from the one Creator, what does it mean that these early believers, right from the start, depicted Jesus standing on the Creator's side of it? By giving him worship, what were they ultimately declaring about who he was?